Minister Ayalon, I wonder if I could begin by saying welcome and asking you, do you have any optimism that the proposed peace talks will bear fruit over the next few years?
Yes, I do. I think the talks were long overdue. I think it's much better to talk than not to talk, to iron out any differences, but most of all, to rebuild trust, which is so much is missed now.
But Minister, I wonder if I could press you on that particular point, because if anything, since Operation Cast Lead, Hamas have become more entrenched in Gaza. Perhaps they've even become militarily stronger, yet Israel refuses to talk to Hamas. So I wonder, what is the basis for your optimism if Israel refuses to talk to Hamas?
Well, Hamas is mainly a threat to not just to peace, but to the Palestinian Authority. They are the ones who actually are undermining and threatening indeed Fayyad and Abu Mazen and the entire authority. They would like to be in their stead, just as the coup in January 2007 in Gaza, when they threw out the authority. They would like to do the same now. It's the authority itself which is not engaging with Hamas. So I don't think that they would like to start a double track. I mean, we need to have one legitimate authority, which is Palestinian, right-hand authority, and with them we can really have a common interest. Hamas, unfortunately, is, for all purposes, an organ of Iran today. They represent not Palestinian interests, rather, but Iranian interests.
That way may well be true about Persian influence or Persian attempts at influence, Minister, but I wonder, what evidence can you offer to us to confirm the basis of that you're making that claim? And more to the point, how does Persian influence, particularly amongst Palestinians and particularly in Gaza, how does that play itself out, or how is it manifest to the rest of the world?
On the ground, all the weapons which is illegally smuggled to Gaza comes from Iran by way of Syria, by way of roundabout routes, but it's coming from Iran. The political support, financial support is coming from Iran and Syria, both to Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Iran today actually is actually trying to occupy or to challenge the entire existing architecture in the Middle East by trying to gain dominance, and we see it also on account, unfortunately, of the Palestinians.
If that is the case, Minister, then how should we interpret Iranian or Persian ambitions in the region? Are they seriously looking at becoming a regional threat or a regional competitor to Israel, or should it be interpreted as, how would I put it, hegemonistic interests over the smaller nations in the region? And surely Hamas and Hezbollah, who you are arguing are their clients, would have separate agendas anyway, to say nothing of Syria and other allies that they would have in the region.
All I have to ask you is to look into the Arab leagues and to the criticism that Syria receives from the other Sunni governments in the region, in which they see Syria as a Trojan horse of Iran in the area. Iran, yes, indeed, they have an hegemonic ambitions. I believe that their nuclear program is not an end in itself, it's also a means to actually to topple down all the regimes now. We'll see what they do in Egypt, all the agents, Iranian agents that are arrested in Egypt, the big court case now, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen. They took over Lebanon through the Hezbollah. They took over Gaza through the Hamas. And Syria, unfortunately, is their partner now, and it's a very, very serious and dangerous partnership.
But Minister, wouldn't President Abbas be correct in his saying that over the years you've undermined the PA so much that they're not really in a position to be a partner for peace with you? And now we're getting the same scenario played out with Hamas, that what used to be said about Fatah is now being said about Hamas. And Fatah would then, or at least the PA would say, well, equally building settlements, particularly in East Jerusalem, not only undermines their authority, but it also undermines the integrity or the credibility of the entire process. How would you respond to that?
I would say that, well, there is, the legacy or heritage, the Judeo-Christian heritage, I guess, teaches us, builds in our DNA, not only self-criticism, but to take a lot of guilt. But I don't think this is the case. I think that the Palestinians took the offer in 2000 from Barak, really to have almost 95% of their wishes, and then another offer in 2008, about two and a half years ago from Olmert. We could have had peace by now.
Well, that's not true, because the Palestinians would say that you didn't actually agree on the return of refugees, and there were other issues about settlements as well. Why is Israel, though, continuing to build settlements, particularly in East Jerusalem, as the Palestinians, as you know, would say that is going to be their capital in a sovereign state?
Well, I would say to that history should speak out. It has never been a sovereign of any capital of any other country or people but Israel and the Jewish people. But this is something that we would like to discuss with them. As I said, everything is on the table without prejudging and without preconditioning. If you look at history, settlements have never been the issue or an obstacle to peace. Just draw your attention from 1948 to 67, there wasn't even one settlement, there wasn't a peace, but terror continued and they tried to push us into the sea. When we made peace with Egypt in 79, the settlements in the Sinai were not the issue. Actually, each and every one was evacuated, including Yamit, which is a major city. We tried this in Gaza in 2005, but we tried to make it as a good gesture for them, but they didn't reciprocate. On the other hand, we received more and more missiles from Gaza. Every place we evacuated, instead of having reconciliation and coexistence, we see terrorism hold on. So things are very serious, very complex. It's not just black and white, and we have to seriously talk to them, and only together we can iron out the differences. About the refugees, as you mentioned, nobody talks about Jewish refugees, 850,000 Jewish refugees that we received here. Unfortunately, the refugees that were a result of aggression by the Arab countries back in 1948 against UN Resolution 181 were not received by the Arabs. They were held in subhuman or inhuman conditions as pawns. We're talking now about fourth, fifth generation. There's no example in history in the world that the fifth generation would claim to go to where their ancestors were. Look at Europe after World War II. 60 million refugees were changed. However, I feel for them, and they should have an appropriate solution. And the solution for them is in the Palestinian state, which we agreed to help build. So I think once we have a two-state solution, we should bring into finality also the issue of refugees and of the conflicts. Palestinians should be in the Palestinian place and not in Israel, just as Jews should be in Israel.
Minister, I believe we're going to have to briefly end this interview because of the necessity for a security drill. But if I could ask you before we conclude, how would you interpret Irish attitudes to Israel? While it's apparent that government-to-government relations are satisfactory, generally speaking, the Irish public is considered to be fairly anti-Israeli, in fact, one of the most anti-Israeli in Europe. And this has been particularly manifest in the so-called Irish ships to Gaza trying to break the blockade there. So how would you characterize those relations? And I wonder, is there any lessons that perhaps Israel might learn from the so-called peace process, where what was effectively a very intransigent conflict has, to a certain degree, if not been resolved, has been normalized? And do you think there is any lessons to be learned by Israel from our experience?
Well, we respect Ireland, we respect the Irish. I think we have a lot of commonalities, much more that we can delineate now. Again, we are not against any criticism. I think friends should have the right and the obligation, maybe, to talk to each other, even criticize in a respectful manner, and conduct which merits the common interest in the shared gaps that we have, and I'm sure we can overcome these incidents. Well, I think that it is very difficult to judge the complexity of the situation when you're far out. And also, you have been, I think, blessed with solving a very, very intransigent conflict of your own in North Ireland, which we applaud. And maybe you compare that to us, but I don't think you can compare the two conflicts, unfortunately, because here, the root of the conflict here is that one side doesn't accept the legitimacy of the others, which wasn't the case, between Protestant and Catholics in Northern Ireland. So I wish you would appreciate more the complexities here and what we face here, but I can tell you that we want peace. It's our interest to have peace, and if you look in the past, when we had partners that we could trust and that could deliver, like late King Hussein and late President Sadat, we did make a lot of compromises and concessions. We are still willing to do that with the Palestinians. Many more concessions to take, and I hope there will be a day where we can trust each other and move on.